Hello and welcome to the One Question Leadership Podcast. This is Jill Bodensteiner, Director of Athletics at St. Joseph's University. As leaders, it's really important that we're clear regarding our goals and our vision and how those integrate into the greater university goals. We also need to collectively create a strategy and a culture that are going to help us reach our goals. This is an evolving exercise that requires an openness to continuous improvement. That's why I follow the One Question Leadership Podcast, because I love learning as much as I possibly can from my colleagues that helps me be the best that I can be. So my message for the day, keep learning, keep leading.
Greetings, this is Ty Brown, and welcome to the One Question Leadership Podcast, where we highlight executive and organizational leadership. Be sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram at 1Q Leadership. Our guest today is Juliana Smith. Juliana is the Deputy Athletics Director and Senior Woman Administrator at Colgate. Greetings, Juliana. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Ty. Thanks for having me.
Now, you have been in the profession, college athletics profession, for roughly 10 years. You spent the early part of your career working at Oklahoma in a number of roles, went to Texas Tech and was Director of Operations for a number of different sports while at Tech, back to Oklahoma. And your experience is, I think, before getting to Colgate is kind of like in the human resources, administrative engagement work. And of course, you worked with Nikki Moore, current athletic director at Colgate, while you were at Oklahoma. So I think you've been around the elephants of the profession in terms of leadership, and you've seen a lot of leadership decision making, seen how people do things. You've seen a lot of hiring. So I think you have an interesting perspective in terms of college athletics and in terms of leadership. So I'm happy to have you on the podcast today.
Happy to be here.
So what I want to start with is your relationship to Nikki in terms of working with her at Oklahoma and then her hiring you at Colgate and now recently making you the Deputy Athletics Director. Talk to me a little bit about the progression of that relationship.
Absolutely. I actually met Nikki after I arrived at Oklahoma as a graduate assistant. I was hired by Dr. Brandon Martin as an Athletics Diversity Council graduate assistant. And my role was supposed to be one that rotated amongst different units throughout my 2 years there. However, Dr. Moore, who, as she was called at the University of Oklahoma, affectionately, was overseeing academics at the time and was looking for a graduate assistant. Brandon introduced me to her. We hit it off, and I spent my 2 years working directly with her. She received the SWA title and moved up to the third floor. If you've ever been to the University of Oklahoma's athletics department, the senior administration are concentrated in a segment of the third floor. And so I went up there with her and worked with her on a day-to-day basis on all of the areas that she oversaw, whether it be strength conditioning, sports medicine, housing. They built a brand new residence hall there while she was there, and she led that whole project and its operations. And so it was a great time to really learn through osmosis, learn through asking questions, and learn by listening. She really invited me into spaces that I otherwise would not have been in. And I'm grateful for that time that I spent at Oklahoma because it really prepared me for the other roles I took on at Texas Tech, but also back at Oklahoma.
I want to ask you about your deputy role and actually the transition from your growth of human resources, operations, and now you're in a deputy AD role, and you've been in that role for a year and a half now. And I wonder, deputy role is different all across the country. And I wonder what your role, your version of being a deputy athletics director consists of.
That is actually a really great question. And I'm so glad you highlighted the fact that this role as a deputy athletics director is operationalized differently across our division, but across the nation at NCAA member institutions. And particularly in my role at Colgate University, I oversee the internal operations of our division, and our division actually includes physical education, recreation, and athletics. So the easiest way to think about how our division is split, we have a stewardship side, which is more centered on fundraising and relationship stewardship. We have an external side, and then we have the internal side. And so I oversee our internal units to our division, and really those positions and units that directly touch our student athletes and students who come through our division for any number of reasons. And the deputy role is operationalized in a way in which I serve as Nikki's proxy, right? She's an athletics director. She can't be in more than one place at a time. And I think our relationship and our history working together really allows me to function in that role, um, and be effective in that role more quickly, maybe than others who, if she would have hired someone who she had not worked with before. And I think that's really critical when you think about a deputy role, in that you have to trust the person in that role. If you're the athletics director, you have to trust that the decisions that they make will be aligned with the decisions that you would make if you were there. Whether or not the process by which you either of you get to that decision is the same, I think doesn't matter. But I think what really matters is that the end decision is one that you would feel comfortable making yourself. And I think that's where Nikki and I find ourselves working together and being effective in our working relationship, is because we end up at the same place oftentimes. How we get there, whether we debate it out or really talk about pros and cons, and we have two very different perspectives on how we approach problem solving. And I think that's what makes the relationship rich, and I think that's what makes our department better, because we are so different in that way.
I'd like to maybe dig in a little bit on that in terms of making recommendations to Nikki. You said you guys have different decision making processes, and I actually want to dig into that a little later. But you're also athletics administrator for football, women's basketball, and men's golf. Of course, you spent some time in operations when you were at Texas Tech. Now you're in a position where my assumption, what I know about administrating sports, is that the coaches, for the lack of a better word, report to you and you make sure they have what they need for success type situation. Talk to me a little bit about administrating those specific sports, especially when you talk about football, which is always a huge sport on college campuses.
For sure. I actually have mixed up my sports a bit since first getting here at Colgate. So I started with those sports. I picked up men's lacrosse last year, picked up track and field and cross country as well this year, in the 2021 academic year. Dropped men's lacrosse, kept football, women's basketball, track and field, and cross country. But in my role as deputy, I also oversee our sport administrator program. So essentially, all of our other sport administrators also report to me, or I facilitate that program in which they do have other sports assigned to them. And so, really, in my role as the lead sport administrator, I help support our other sport administrators and how they support their coaches on a day-to-day basis. I essentially serve as Nikki's proxy in some situations where they need, quick answers or opinions about things that their coaches are asking them about. And particularly with my sport of football, that's been an interesting development, in that, like, it's such a large roster. Our head coach has been here for a really long time, was an assistant for a long time, and was promoted to head coach. And really, it's about relationship building, right? You meet them where they are. You show up at practice, travel with them on the road, eat with them at team meals, and really just learn how they do what they do, what principles guide their decisions, and really try to align the department's vision and operations with how they see their program operating.
Right, right. When you have to make a recommendation to Nikki, you, I assume, worked with her for a few years now and understand how she thinks and how she comes to her decisions. So you get information from different parts of campus, different parts of the department, and then Nikki has to make a decision on something. So talk to me about informing her, making recommendations, and how you come about deciding what she needs to decide on, or maybe if it's something that you can make a decision on.
For sure. I think one thing that has helped me in this role is my background in Homeland Security. I know that seems really far-fetched, but in undergrad, I studied intelligence and security studies, and our training was critical thinking, getting three steps ahead. It was seriously, we were taught how to think like an analyst would, who was working to combat terrorism. Like, that was what we did in those studies. And I think that's been so helpful to me, because I am able to process information really quickly. It's weird and scary, but I'm able to process information and large amounts of information really quickly, and consider the obstacles, pain points that may come up, and then also and then present a recommendation to Nikki about what we should do. Oftentimes, when I'm bringing a recommendation to Nikki, I'm also bringing her the problem, right? So not only have I gotten the problem, but I've also already figured out what I want to recommend for a solution. So when I present the problem to her, I'm saying, hey, here's what we ran into. This is what I think we should do. This is why I think we should do it. She then asked me 15 million questions, which is great because I've already gone through this process. She asked me these questions and I'm able to answer them. And then she gets to understand how I went through the process of the recommendation that now sits in front of her. Oftentimes, I can make those decisions on my own. And when I report back to her the decisions that I did make, it's the same type of process, right? So, hey, Nikki, this problem came up. We solved it. This is how it went down. She'll ask me a few questions and say, oh, okay, cool. I would have made the same decision, or I would have made this decision differently this way, but I'm still okay with the decision. I don't know that I can recall a time where I made a decision that was just completely the opposite of what she would make had she been the one in that position.
You've been in that deputy position for, I guess, almost a year and a half now. And that part, I guess you learned from osmosis, right? From early in your career, seeing people do things and watching how they do things. But I mean, now you're leading however many full-time people who have their own areas of autonomy. Talk to me about the transition to leading people, and what is your core value in terms of leading other people, leading the coaches? I mean, you can't lead everybody the same, like you mentioned, but people definitely need to know that everything is fair. So talk to me a little bit about that part, leading other people who are their own entity in themselves in terms of having their own areas of responsibility in the department.
Yeah, I think leading people, what helps me, I think, be most effective in that space is listening. You have to meet people where they are. You have to listen in a way that you hear what they're saying, you hear what they're not saying, and then you also hear the impact, right? So you may think, have an opinion about what they're explaining to you, but at the end of the day, it's really not about your opinion, right? It's about um, tending to the needs of our employees, tending to the needs of our student athletes, of our coaches, because we're the leaders. Like we get paid to lead, we get paid to curate this experience that is fulfilling and that allows people to achieve the goals that they have for them. And oftentimes, by allowing and helping and supporting people in achieving their professional goals, their academic and athletic goals, it makes the division better. It makes the institution better, and not to be weird, but it makes the world better, right? If you set up a situation where people are allowed to be their best self and push the limits of their potential, and they can see that they're not in it by themselves, and that they're supported in all that they want to do and want to accomplish, everyone's better because of it. And as a leader, I would say um, every situation that I'm faced with is a new situation, right? We've not come to this point before in our lives. We haven't been dealt with. We haven't dealt with a global pandemic before. We haven't dealt in my generation with this racial reconciliation that's going on in our country, and I haven't done it while being a deputy athletics director at a Division I institution in
Right.
upstate New York, right?
Everything is new, right? Everything,
Everything
the
is
new adventures
new.
of life.
Exactly. And so we can't go into situations just assuming that we've been here before and we know how to handle it, because we don't. Even when we're not in a global pandemic, every situation is new, every situation is unique, and every person is an individual.
Yeah, it's interesting. One thing you said there was you have to listen to people and hear what they're saying, but it's important to hear what they're not saying. I think that is a very profound statement there. I wonder about your position as deputy athletics director. You get to a senior leadership position in your career, and one of the first things that probably comes up or actually comes up over time is, what are my areas of autonomy? Where can I make the decision, the final decision, right? And inform you that this is the final decision. Is that defined for you in terms of, as a deputy, these are the things you are 100% responsible for? Just tell me what your decision is, or talk to me a little bit about that in terms of areas of autonomy as a deputy AD.
Yes, I would say anything dealing with our people, right? So I previously served as chief of staff, although the title dropped off just because it would be weird to have a three-line title. The role remains, and I'm in charge of our people, and I lead our people. And so when we go through hiring processes, whether it be for our athletics faculty positions, for our staff positions, even our part-time positions. That's on me, right? And I have to answer to Nikki about the decisions that are made and the new hires that are made. And so one way in which I ensure that I'm well informed and support the decisions we make as it relates to supporting assistant coach hires and things like that is I'm involved in all of our searches, right? So anyone who's in a search for a position at Colgate has to meet with me if they make it to the final round. And obviously in this virtual setting, it's via Zoom, but everyone who makes it to a second round interview meets with me. And it's not actually about the role. Like when we talk, I am judging character, I am judging their alignment with our vision and virtues. And I'm just taking a pulse. Like I have, I would say, great intuition as it relates to judging people. And because I know so strongly what we're trying to accomplish as a division here at Colgate University, like I can tell when something's off or when someone won't fit or align well with what we're trying to do here. And Nikki trusts me without a shadow of a doubt in those situations for sure. So I would say anything related to our people for sure is probably where I have the greatest autonomy in decision making.
All right, excellent. Real quick, you mentioned that what you learned while you were in undergrad, the process of gathering information, process information, and providing either recommendations or making a decision. You said you have the ability to process enormous amounts of information. You were trained to do that. Do you, in your brain, is there an internal matrix of categories and rows and columns, and this goes here, it's formula, decision? Talk to me about how your brain works in terms of processing a bunch of information.
Yeah, I think I'm not sure if this is unique to me or if it's just the roles that I've been in, is that the filters that I use most often are people, right? Mission and finances, right? So when I think about how we make decisions, how will this impact our people? Who will benefit? Who won't benefit? What are the disadvantages? If there are disadvantages, can those disadvantages be mitigated? When I think about finances, like, can we afford to do this? Like, I know off the bat whether or not we can afford to do something. Is this a new expense, etc.? And so, really quickly, I can go through those things, or who needs to be involved, right? Who needs to be involved in this process? Like, if something's coming out of sports medicine, but really it should include student athlete development, I should not be making a decision just from off the information I got from sports medicine. Like, I need to include student athlete development.
Yeah, excellent. So essentially, it's you have things that you evaluate information against: the people, the
Absolutely.
mission, and the finances, and you've trained yourself to evaluate information against those things very quickly and efficiently, and then need to know if you need to gather more information or can you make that decision or recommendation right there. That's excellent. I'll ask one more question before we wrap. It's specifically about the pandemic and the social injustice we've seen, over the last few months. Well, we've seen it for years, right? Decades, going back hundreds of years. But in terms of it's becoming a very public and very widely discussed thing. And then the pandemic obviously is new. There's a new chapter in world history that we're all going through. Nikki is very visual, very intent, I guess, from the outside looking in when you talk about diversity, inclusion, equity, and being vocal about being an ally and supporting and really make her staff make up and a number of those things when you talk about race and inclusion and talking against social injustice. I wonder about the escalation, right, since March in your department of making decisions regarding the pandemic. Obviously, student athletes, right, in terms of people and mission, student athletes are important. And you got to think about finances, like you mentioned. But then also when this other variable comes in of the global discussion of racial injustice. Tell me about your role, the department, Nikki's input, and how everything has played out and is continuously playing out there at Colgate.
It's been a long summer. I'll start by saying that what I will say is Nikki has been unbelievable in her advocacy, in her allyship, in her role in agitating the system and how we normally do business. I take it back actually to 2018 when she first became the athletics director at Colgate University. I was hired shortly thereafter, and we went through this process of developing our vision and virtues for our division. And it was a really hard process, one that included interviews and feedback from every single person um, that worked for us. And one of the things that we had a hard time coming up with is that our virtues were like not sexy. We couldn't make a fun acronym. They were hard to remember, but they were true, right? So our virtues are thoughtful, driven, enthusiastic, cohesive, and bold. Um, but they felt true, right? And we're like, well, do we want to sacrifice the truth for something that we can make a cute bumper sticker on or social media
Right.
a
Yeah.
thumbnail? And we decided not to. And then we also created a vision to be an inclusive community of competitive excellence. That was 2 years ago. This summer, when there was the tragic loss of George Floyd and Nikki put out a statement. It was heartening for me as a Black woman working in college athletics, to know that um, everything was coming to a head as it relates to us putting our money where our mouth is, essentially. Like, right? 2 years ago, we said we're an inclusive community of competitive excellence. And now we're able to show and demonstrate that vision operationally, right? What does that look like when it's hard? What does that look like when you may be getting pressured to not say the phrase Black Lives Matter in that order? Um, and it looks like Nikki Moore saying Black Lives Matter in that order. It looks like her stepping up and being bold in spaces where maybe some of her peers were a little bit more apprehensive to be bold early on. But it also allowed, I think, our staff to feel empowered to speak up when they feel like they've witnessed things, systems, processes that are racist, and they want to recommend things that are anti-racist. And I think we've been able to have much richer conversation across our division as it relates to race in a way that I would have never guessed early on in my career that we would be having in this space.
Right. That's excellent. That's excellent. And then you talk about the the wider situation is a pandemic, and in terms of you're still working from home, student athletes not being able to do the things they want to do, coaches not being able to execute what they want to execute. There had to be some leadership there coming from your position as the administrator of the sports administrators, and also for the sports that you administer, that you are the sports administrator over. Talk to me a little bit about that aspect in the pandemic in terms of Colgate Athletics.
Communications. That has been the most effective tool in this time. Every day there is something different. Every day decisions are changing. Things are changing. Plans are changing. And the best thing that we can do for our student athletes, for our coaches, for our sport programs, even for our conference, is to communicate, right? Even when we don't have answers, even when we don't know how long it will be until we have answers, making sure that our constituents, coaches, student athletes, administrators, league partners know what we're doing, how we're doing it, the process by which we're doing it, allows everyone to be a little bit clearer in a time when there's no clarity. And I think our division really appreciated how often Nikki communicated, but also how accessible her, our executive leadership team have been during this time, right? To have conversations, to answer their questions when they're hearing, chatter on Twitter or from their colleagues in other leagues about what we're doing. Like it didn't take anything for a head coach to pick up the phone and call me and say, "Hey, I'm hearing this. What's going on? What are you hearing from the Patriot League?" And I'm able to have that conversation. And I think involving people in the conversation, yeah, there's sometimes you won't be able to give as much information as you have, but what you can give it.
Which is of the utmost importance. Juliana, it sounds like you're doing an excellent job there at Colgate. Sounds like Nikki appreciates you having her. You sound like you appreciate working for her. And I wish you guys continued success there at Colgate.
Thank you, Ty. It's been a great conversation.
That was Juliana Smith. She's the Deputy Athletics Director and Senior Woman Administrator at Colgate. And of course, this is Ty Brown with one question. And keep in mind, the role of a leader is to create and maintain an environment that people want to be a part of. And as always, be better tomorrow than you are today. This episode of the One Question Leadership Podcast is produced by Spades Media Group, solving problems using creative leadership.